All right, my English teacher friends. So I have another writing workshop that I'd like to introduce where I use children's literature conceptually to teach line of reasoning. So one of the things that I discovered actually through reading stories to my grandson is that a lot of children's literature feature my template of the syllogistic method. So for those that are familiar with my work, you know that across the expository modes. So, for literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research, my students use the syllogistic method template to construct all of their body paragraphs. So, it works uniformly across the expository modes. And one of the things I realized in reading children's literature is that a lot of these texts are written syllogistically. And I've done some videos in the past where I've used The Very Hungry Caterpillar, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, The Forgetful Elephant, etc. And I stumbled upon this book that's fascinating by Jon Klassen called I Want My Hat Back. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you how conceptually the storyline in I Want My Hat Back is a great way, a great segue into teaching line of reasoning. And what I'll do is I'll take a classic short story that often gets taught in the American high school curriculum, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. And then I'll do a companion piece to this where I will take a look at a rhetorical analysis as well. And I'm thinking I'm going to use Kobe Bryant's letter to his 17-year-old self. So stay tuned for that video. I'll make that shortly. So what I'm going to do in this video is highlight real quickly my syllogistic construct, my syllogistic method. And if you want a deeper dive into that, then just go digging through my YouTube channel. I get into lessons of inductive and deductive reasoning quite thoroughly. But for this, I'm just going to do kind of a drive-by. And then I'll show you how to cobble together a body paragraph where students will perform literary analysis of Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. So let me dig right into this. So we'll take the lottery and just deconstruct it bit by bit in terms of getting that body paragraph together. And then if you want to see the whole writing workshop with my introductions and other body paragraphs, that's in my YouTube channel as well. So I'm just going to show you a couple of body paragraphs in this video. So as always, my caveat is this. I ask the question, what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? Right? There's a fundamental difference between the assigning of writing and the direct explicit teaching of it. And one of the things I always say to teachers when I work with them through the National Writing Project or through my own consulting is that it's really best to take a Bob Ross approach to composition. And what I mean by that is I want teachers to position themselves as the expert writer in the classroom and to quote unquote paint with their students. So let's say that we're doing the whole essay here, and I could say to students, we know we're performing literary analysis, and we got the declarative thesis and the inverted thesis for our introductory paragraphs, but we know from experience that for literary analysis, you always want to invert the thesis. So me as the expert writer in the classroom will say, I'm going to Bob Ross this for you guys. And here are 3 introductions that I wrote. And then I just talk through it, 1, 2, 3, and say, all right, guys, you've seen it 3 times. On your mark, get set, go, do it. It really demystifies the writing process when teachers are providing models and exemplars for their students that they write. I'm a big proponent of this. The more good writing students see, the easier it is to facilitate their growth and maturation as writers. So they're either looking at good student samples or good teacher samples that have been written, and it's really goes a long way. So for those that aren't familiar with I Want My Hat Back by Jon Klassen, the storyline goes like this. So you have this critter right here, and he goes to other critters and he says, have you seen my hat? So his discourse is in black. And then the turtle says, I haven't seen anything all day. I've been trying to climb this rock. Would you like me to lift you on top of it? Yes, please. So he goes to all these critters and asks, have you seen my hat? No one's seen his hat. Have you seen my hat? He asked the snake. I saw a hat once. It was blue and round. My hat doesn't look like that. Thank you anyway. So he's kind of like, this critter's kind of like me. I'm always losing my keys. I can't find my shoes. I don't know where I parked my car in the parking lot half the time after I go grocery shopping. And in writing, what happens is that students drop quotes, or they drop certain expressions or statements in their topic sentences, or they drop a thesis in the introductory paragraph, and then they forget where they placed their keys. They forget their hat. They've lost their hat, and they don't keep the promises that they're dropping in their first premise. Their quotes aren't aligned, their paraphrases aren't aligned. The line of reasoning is just completely wayward and broken. So ultimately in the story, the little critter finds, the bunny rabbit with his hat, and he's like, "Oh, I found my hat." So in this exercise, I read this story to the kids, and we talk about the line of reasoning, the deductive and the inductive qualities of the story in terms of getting this critter to find his hat, and the thought processes, the steps he has to go through in order to make the calculated, methodical aha of where is my hat. And in writing, it's very similar, right? You got to go premise, premise, conclusion in terms of the syllogistic construct. So the question we got to ask ourselves is this: how do I write the body paragraphs? And as always, I say proceed syllogistically. Well, what is that? Let me give you a little brief overview of it. The syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. So Aristotle invented it, when he ran his school called the Lyceum. And the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they would throw out these big, juicy, essential questions like, what is justice? And maybe somewhere along the way you've encountered Plato's Republic, which centers around that question, that essential question of what is justice. And these great philosophical think takers step to the proverbial mic and they drop their definition of what justice is, and the rest of the crew huddles up and they found the bullet hole, or the bullet holes in the logic. But Aristotle, is very much like us composition teachers, and he would say things like this: why is it that Jason is God's gift to oration and Katrina's just kind of meh, and Brad just can't sustain a line of reasoning to save himself? Did God come around on his gravy train and say, you will be bestowed with the ability to sustain real cogent line of reasonings, and you'll just be meh, and you'll tank bomb it every time you attempt it? And he said, no, I can't believe that as a teacher. I have to, help facilitate the growth, the maturation, the flourishment of my students. So I got to come up with a method. And he decided to carefully study what his really good orators were doing. And then one day he had a eureka moment. He said, and lifting the lids of, and looking at the brains, the internal clockwork, the machinations of my good orators, they proceed syllogistically. They go premise, premise, conclusion. It's very mathematical. It's very computative. So a basic syllogism is when you proceed from premise, premise to conclusion. So premise 1, I could say arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, I could say my dog ate arsenic. Therefore, you naturally conclude my dog is going to die. So I'll give you another example. In premise 1, if I say any 38-year-old or older non-felon born in the U.S. can run for the presidency. Premise 2, James, he's 42, born in the state of Rhode Island, non-felon, no criminal record. Conclusion, naturally, we're going to state James can run for the presidency. So Aristotle called it cogency, and we call it line of reasoning. We want our students to have this very computative, mathematical, clear line of reasoning from start to finish in their body paragraphs. And unfortunately, what I see with a lot of the templates that students use is that these templates set them up to perform plot analysis and not literary analysis. And I'd like to do, a webinar or build some videos where I dissect College Board sample papers for AP Literature to show that the bulk of what students do is actually just write second premises. And that's why they, their FRQ 1s, 2s, and 3s read like Cliff Note summations. All right, it's like a regurgitation of the poem. I'm going to tell you A, B, C, the delineation of what happened in this poem. And that's plot analysis. So you're not even meeting the demands of the assignment. So we got to make sure that students are arguing from start to finish in literary analysis, because it's an expository mode, and all expository writing is an act of arguing. So for the purposes of performing literary analysis, here's what we got to do. The first premise is an argument containing the literary terms and or devices. The first premise always is going to be 3 sentences long. And the reason why I have it be 3 sentences long is because when I read a lot of other students' work, I see that they're quoting or paraphrasing or plot summarizing way up high in the topic sentences. And again, if you do that, you've deviated from the demand of the assignment and you're doing plot analysis and not literary analysis. So when students take 3 sentences to argue their terms and devices, not only can they drop a few terms and devices, but the big thing is they're going to break this pattern. So oftentimes when students write, they do 1 paragraph diction, 1 paragraph tone, 1 paragraph ethos, 1 paragraph pathos, etc. They do 1 term per body paragraph, and they write those little itty bitty 4-sentence bagger paragraphs. There's not enough analysis in there, and they certainly are not going to get the sophistication point. It's too chunky and elementary and dutiful to really advance any hardcore analysis. So if a student takes 3 sentences, they can begin to connect things like the tone and the syntax, or the tone, the syntax, the conflict, the setting, right? And begin to see how the pieces intersect with each other, interface with each other, and construct meaning together. So that's pretty cool. And on FRQ 1 of the AP Lang exam, the College Board says to students 3 times, your argument must be central. And I wish they would have that direction on all 6 FRQs, Lang and Lit. So even though we're doing literary analysis, your argument must be central. So I like 3 sentences to have the centrality of the argument be at the focal point. Premise 2, we have Shirley Jackson's The Lottery in front of us. So we're going to have textual support. We're going to quote and paraphrase in this nice teeter-totter balance. We don't want to do one far more at the expense of the other. Otherwise, it falls out of kilter, and there's a noticeable imbalance there between the two. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. And I really want to emphasize this. The conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay, is where the textual analysis comes in. And I always tell my students the first premise is a promise. So you got to shake hands with that guy, right? And you're going to link back to the prompt, echo the thesis. It all comes full circle. Now, with templates, students ask good questions. They're like, all right, Mr. Kuhn, for your introductory templates of the declarative and inverted thesis, you want 4 sentences always, while the training wheels and scaffolds are up and on. So how many sentences do you want for a syllogistic body paragraph? And I always tell them, shoot for 10 sentences, right? Those 4-sentence baggers just don't work. There's not enough in there. They're not active enough. There's just not pithy analysis and, argument going on in there. So I say shoot for 10, pretty much a hard cap at 12. I wouldn't go over 12. Otherwise, you're going to bloviate, get wayward, probably break the line of reasoning. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you what the syllogistic method looks like, just raw, straight up. I'm going to read this body paragraph to you. And then I'm going to show you how I would demonstrate line of reasoning using I want my hat back. So let's take a look at the first 3 sentences. One good question that students ask is this when they get into their bodies. Where do I begin? Where do I begin my analysis? And I always tell them, start where the author starts. So you'll see my students use clauses like this right from the onset. It's a really good indicator to your reader that you're supremely organized, that you're going to have a chronology, a sequence, a methodical approach through your analysis. So I say start with what Jackson does first and then link the elements and devices together. Get a few things going on in here at one time. And again, 3 sentences. So look how the terms and devices are used. Right from the onset, Jackson presents how normal and comfortable groupthink can feel for a collection of people. So, all right, we have to talk about groupthink. That's a promise. The blind allegiance and unthinking acceptance of what is unquestionably wrong gets overlooked simply for the human urge of fitting in and not stirring the pot. So we got to talk about that concept of fitting in, of conformity, that element of groupthink, all right? So we're really focusing on the theme of the story. Immediately, the initial motifs and symbols introduced reinforce these natural tendencies as the setting is constructed and action builds. So the motifs and the themes and the symbols and the setting now need to be analyzed. So we got to start with groupthink since we said it first. Then we're going to get into the motifs, the symbols, and the setting. All of our quotes, all of our paraphrasing has to do with groupthink, motif, symbol, setting. That's how we sustain the line of reasoning. First premise is a promise. So in the 4th sentence, we begin the second premise, and I tell my students, get quoting, get paraphrasing immediately. Since you said groupthink first, you need the best quote in order to sustain your line of reasoning that exemplifies that groupthink, right? So you've got a quote with deliberation. So look what the student does here. Blind thought gets ritualized and unknowingly accepted, so much so that everyone understood the whole lottery would take less than 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. All right, very good. So that's a silky smooth quote transition right there. There's a template I have for quote transitions, and I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. Sometimes they're going to need to bracket in order for that to happen. So Bob Ross, how to do that. But note here, you have more than 5 words in front of the quote, and it sounds conversational. We quoted. Now we got to analyze this in terms of the concept of groupthink. Little does it matter that one community is obligated to get stoned to death. Lunch must be promptly served at noon, the agreed upon time that is prearranged every single day of the year. No one ever questions why this annual event must occur, just as they do not question the rigidity of their schedules. All right, so we got the groupthink. We're cruising here. This is good, but we promised other things, so we got to go get some quotes and paraphrases for that. Jackson repeatedly suggests that this singular tradition ought to be drawn into question, yet the symbol of the box is a reminder of just how powerful groupthink can be. So why are we talking about the symbol of the box? Because we promised that thematically, motif, symbol, setting, right? We talked about that. So let's go get some quotes and paraphrases about that box. The reader is told that the black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or strained. All right, that's a perfect quote. If we're talking about the black box, we have to have a black box quote. Perfect, right? So this is what I mean. Like, keep it all germane. Keep it all tied to the line of reasoning. So we quote, we got to analyze. The annual lottery is also a traditional relic that needs to be replaced, if not completely removed from this society. But years blindly go by and nothing changes. Every year, one town member takes one for the team. Now we're at the conclusion. This usually takes 2 or 3 sentences. I tell my guys, keep it brief, and you link everything back. Echo the thesis, echo the prompt, right? Really tie everything back. So the power of groupthink can do this, completely rid one of their ability to think as an individual. Well, that's where we began, right? We're talking about groupthink. It's in our thesis. It's like our thematic thread. Man can do some pretty bizarre and strange things when such a phenomena goes unchecked. In the end, it's just like a lottery whereby one's blind allegiance might mean the calling of their number. And all, this one's a little long, but you're shooting for 10, 12 sentences. That's a very cogent line of reasoning. So let's bring it back to I Want My Hat Back by Jon Klassen and put hats next to our promises. All right, so this is the first premise again. And what I do with this exercise is I, just in a Canva document, I create, you know, a bunch of different hats on a sheet, and I print them in color, and my students will cut out various hats. So usually I might have like 5 cowboy hats on it. I might have 5 beanies. I might have 5 sombreros, right? And then students, when they're constructing their essay, or editing their essay, proofreading their essays prior to submitting their essays, will use these hats in accordance to what I do. So just follow along, and I'll unpack what I mean by that in just a second. So this is the first premise, the first 3 sentences of the body paragraph. So we're going to put a hat next to each promise. Right from the onset, Jackson presents how normal and comfortable groupthink can feel for a collection of people. All right, so we're going to put a hat on groupthink. We got our cowboy hat. We're now going to have to talk about groupthink in the rest of our body paragraph. So we're going to have some quotes and some paraphrases about groupthink. So when I flip slides here and get into the 4th sentence and beyond, we want to see some cowboy hat stuff, right? We got to remember that hat. The blind allegiance and unthinking acceptance of what is unquestionably wrong gets overlooked simply for the human urge of fitting in and not stirring the pot. So we're still talking about groupthink. Immediately, the initial motifs, so blue hat for motifs, and symbols, white and red hat for symbols, introduced reinforce these natural tendencies as the setting. Setting is sombrero, is constructed and action builds. So this is what I mean when I talk about multitasking the first premise. Again, to break that habit of one body paragraph tone, one body paragraph diction, one body paragraph syntax, right? Kids, we can't do that. Can't do that at any level. I don't want students doing that. So you got to begin to see how the pieces intersect with the whole construction of meaning. So we got basically 4 promises here. So now, in terms of finding the right quotes and the right paraphrases, let's see what we have to do here. So since we talked about groupthink first, our cowboy hat needs to come first in the second premise. So look at this. So 4th sentence begins second premise. Blind thought gets ritualized and unknowingly accepted, so much so that everyone understood the whole lottery would take less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. So this quote remembers its hat, right? It's like, where did I put my keys? Where did I park my car? Dude, you talked about a hat. You talked about this in the promise of the first premise. So your quote needs to be germane. Your paraphrase needs to be germane. It needs to be a cowboy hat. So, all right, we quote, we got to analyze. Little does it matter that one community is obligated to get stoned to death. One community member is obligated to get stoned to death. Lunch must be promptly served at noon, the agreed upon time that is prearranged every single day of the year. All right, we're into one of the main motifs here, and I promise that. And it's implied. You don't need to say motif again. You've already said it. So this blue hat is connected to that promise, right? And it's just a paraphrase. We're good. We're covering it. No one ever questions why this annual event must occur, just as they do not question the rigidity of their schedules. We're moving on. Jackson repeatedly suggests that this singular tradition ought be drawn into question, yet the symbol of the box is a reminder of just how powerful groupthink can be. So why did I put that hat there? Because symbol is the white and red hat. So we talked about that third, right? So it comes after the blue hat, the motif, and the groupthink, the cowboy hat. So let's go get a quote or a good paraphrase for that hat. The reader is told that the black box grew shabbier each year. By now, it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. All right, so we got to talk about the symbolism of that, right? Because that's what this hat must remember. We have to remember where it is. The annual lottery is also a traditional relic that needs to be replaced, if not completely removed from this society. But years blindly go by and nothing changes. Every year, one town member takes one for the team, right? And again, we were talking about the setting. We don't need to say setting again. So we got it. We paraphrased it. So we're hooked to the sombrero. At the end, right, you go to the big hat, the thesis, the promise, the prompt, and just a couple of sentences to loop it all back. The power of groupthink can do this. Completely rid one of their ability to think as an individual. Man can do some pretty bizarre and strange things when such a phenomena goes unchecked. In the end, it's just like a lottery whereby one's blind allegiance might mean the calling of their number. And that's how it goes. So you go in order here, all right? Just back it up. So you go cowboy hat, blue baseball cap, white and red baseball cap, sombrero, quotes, paraphrases, all germane to that in that order to sustain the line of reasoning. And then in the end, wrap it all up. And that's just an example of how to do one body paragraph. So students might ask, what do I do next? And the answer is just bust out another syllogism. Change your literary terms and devices, switch up the quotes and the paraphrases, and methodically go through the rest of the story. So we've only scratched the surface. There's still plenty more to analyze in The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, and just continue to build syllogisms. So whether it's a intro, two bodies, conclusion, or if a teacher wants traditional 5-paragraph essays, totally up to you. Just go syllogistically throughout the piece. All right, so we're done. We're at the end. If you got questions or want to try your hand at this and Bob Ross some examples, feel free to give me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I can also pass the slides on to you. Keep in mind, I said this in the beginning, that my full lottery writing workshop is in my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. I'm pretty active in there, and there's lots of good content being added on a weekly basis. And also note that I am a lead teacher with the National Writing Project, and we teamed up and we're offering my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind together going forward. And what that looks like is this: Sunday nights from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 consecutive weeks. We go over my Word Study Academy, my Nuance Academy, how to teach line of reasoning, my templates, my alternative grading methods, my Plato's Plato discussion modality. We go through it all together, and it's a treasure trove of great stuff. So the kicker is NWP, even though it's a 5-hour commitment, it's a total of 5 hours, gives a completion badge of 10 hours, which is pretty cool. So if you need some PD hours, it's a fantastic way to go. And then in the months of November and December, we're going to be doing some webinars on line of reasoning where I show other children's stories and teach how to do line of reasoning. We're going to be doing my alternative grading method. So if you're tired of grading within the traditional paradigm, check it out. I'll keep the groups posted. And then Tim Freitas, the wonderful Tim Freitas of Garden of English fame, and Brandon Abden of AMSCO and Perfection Learning. The three of us have teamed up to do a presentation at this fall's NCTE conference. So stay tuned for that. Got a lot of irons in the fire. I'm staying busy, but I love it. So hopefully you found this to be useful. And happy teaching, happy writing. Be well.